Hello my dear friends, you're on the Military Summary channel, and today we will discuss the situation in Ukraine on the 14th of January of 2024. Today we have a lot of very interesting updates and details, so let's start. And first we're going to talk about the western part of Ukraine. We have a lot of very interesting updates and details about the Russian strikes that took place during the previous days. According to information we have, as a result of another strike somewhere in the western part of Ukraine, the Russians managed to destroy the warehouse of missiles for the Patriot air defense system. Furthermore, the Russians managed to destroy another warehouse with significant number of Storm Shadow missiles. Of course, it's not thousands and hundreds, but some batch of this type of weapon, and they managed to damage and destroy a few Su-24 and MiG-29 aircrafts. And some sources are saying that because of that fact that the weapon that was destroyed and ammo that was destroyed belongs, let's say, to United Kingdom military factories, or at least to factories that can produce this type of weapon. This is the reason why the Rishi Sunak, the Prime Minister of United Kingdom, visited recently Ukraine and signed the security agreement. Basically, the main purpose of that visit was to sign additional military aid and to provide Ukrainians more Patriot missiles and more Storm Shadow missiles, at least to replace those that were destroyed during the Russian missile strikes. Because today the Russian sources reported about a very interesting activity in Rzeszów, the airfield in Poland, and later we got an update that United Kingdom air cargo airplane arrived in this area, and very likely that aircraft brought Storm Shadows and probably missiles for Patriots. Now we are moving to Kyiv. We have also very interesting updates about the security agreement between United Kingdom and Ukraine. As you know, this is just the agreement between Ukraine and United Kingdom. But according to information we have currently, the Ukrainians are working and trying to have some agreements and negotiation. They're handling some negotiations with every single country from G7 and from most of the countries from NATO. And according to information we have, the Ukrainians are planning to sign separate agreements, let's say with the United States of America, with Germany, with France, with every single country that, with the majority of countries who are currently in NATO. They're planning to do them separately, and after this process finishes, then they will try maybe to sign a common agreement with every single country in one agreement. So this is the Ukrainian tactics. They will try to stretch this process in time. They will try to do this very slowly, step by step, and probably, as you know, those days the Minister of Foreign Affairs of France visited Kiev, and very likely that the main topic of discussion was to upcoming signing of the same agreement or analog of agreement with the President of France, Macron. So maybe they were scheduling the procedures, how Macron is going to visit, what date, what kind of agreement they will sign, and something like this. So as I understand, the next country that will sign with the Ukrainians the security agreement is going to be France. Maybe after Germany, and after that maybe the United States of America with Joe Biden. Furthermore, we got another update, as we discussed, the way how the Ukrainians try to avoid mobilization. This is like not just the only single case, more and more cases in Ukraine when men dressed like women trying to avoid the mobilization process and trying not to get into the hands of Ukrainian military forces. This is not the last time, as I understand, we see such a picture. Now we are moving to the situation on the ground, and we're going to start with borderlands between Kharkiv and Belgorod. The Russian sources published the video, a significant number of videos of artillery strikes, of missile strikes, of mortar strikes against Ukrainian positions along the borders. Lots of armored vehicles, tanks, ammo depots were damaged or even destroyed. And there are a few important things that we need to note from these videos. First of all, we have almost every single day 2 or 3 geolocated videos of Russian strikes along the border. The second important thing is that we haven't still seen even a single geolocated video of artillery strikes from the Ukrainian side. This can mean a lot, starting from that Ukrainians don't have artillery forces in this area, and the second thing is that maybe the Ukrainians want to force the Russians to think like this. But as I I understand, the Ukrainians basically don't have possibilities to keep artillery force along the border and to provide, let's say, competitive counter-artillery duels with the Russians. Now we are moving to Kupyansk direction, and we have a lot of very interesting update. For these purposes, it's better to increase the number of updates, let's say, for the previous few days, like 13th and 14th of January. And I'm trying just to show you that the Russians recently, maybe like this week, started using the swarm drone tactics. There are like two types of drones. There are like FPV drones and Lancet drones. Maybe for FPV drones, they're just using them massively. And too massively, I would say. Significant number of armored vehicles were destroyed in Sinkovka area, and we can explain this activity in Sinkovka just with one thing. The Russians, after they were defeated during the previous waves of attacks in the village, after they had significant losses, they took a decision to regroup and to rebuild the tactic and strategy to attack this area. And now the Russians are trying to destroy the Ukrainian forces just with FPV drones. Maybe the commander of Kupyansk direction, Sinkovka direction, was replaced because the previous launched an offensive operation in Sinkovka without a proper artillery and FPV drone preparation, and that was the reason why the Russians had significant losses during those days. And now everything, it's looked like everything the Russians started from the beginning. So we'll see how this round of battle for Sinkovka finishes. Now we are moving to this middle central Kupyansk direction. We have lots of very interesting updates about 4th Tank Brigade. On this video we can see the Ukrainian soldiers. These are not the prisoners of war. This is regular Ukrainian army of 4th Tank Brigade, some battalion, and the commander of this battalion or this company was making a video where he was filming them, and at some certain point he asked the Ukrainian soldiers whether they are going to follow the orders or they will not follow the orders, and that's it. And he asked those who were not going to follow the order to make a few steps in front. And as you can see, almost like 90-95% of that let's say squad, of that unit, made a step forward, which means that these guys refused to follow the orders because they understand that Ukrainian commanders were sending them to the certain death. But the commander of these forces, let's say, took this information very easy without any problems. He just ordered them to turn around and to move, let's say, to another commander, and now it's unknown what is the destiny with these soldiers. Obviously the investigation process has started, and probably most of them will get into the prison if they maybe sign a paper like to follow the orders, who knows. But this is a very critical situation for the Ukrainians on Kupyansk Liman direction, because the Russians are attacking in this area, and obviously very soon they will renew their offensive operation. Because right before we start making this video, we got some updates from different Russian, more or less reliable sources, that the Russians launched another wave of attack in direction of Terny. So maybe tomorrow in the morning update we're gonna start talking about the clashes inside of the villages like Novosadova, Terny, Yampolovka, or even Tarskoye. So we are expecting some updates from this territory. Now we are moving to Bakhmut Artyomovsk direction, and this is the area of 100% use of Lancet sworn drone tactics. And mainly the Russians were using these tactics on the south in the vicinity of Avdiivka, between Alexandra Shultina, Deliivka, and Avdiivka. We have at least 5 geolocated strikes, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of Lancet, and the main, let's say, purpose of this tactic is to fly above the territory. What does it mean, swarm tactics? It means that the drones always in the sky, they're always above your heads, and if some intelligent equipment is able to find or recognize enemy position, then one Lancet of the swarm get this target and start attacking the discovered target. So the drones are always above you, and they're just waiting when they receive some information. And just for the previous 24 hours we got at least 5 geolocated videos from south west Artyomovsk direction with destroyed armored vehicles, artillery forces, Ukraine positions, warehouse with Lancet strikes. The Russians used that attack for a reason. They attacked this territory for a reason, and the main purpose is that the Russians can't penetrate the Ukrainian defense belt in the vicinity of Avdiivka. The Ukrainians still have their positions maybe on the west to Avdiivka, but they are not allowing the Russians to get the positions along the railways. During the previous days, the Russians made lots of attempts to storm this territory, but most of those attacks were repelled by the Ukrainians with artillery strikes, with FPV drone strikes. So that's why the Russians took a decision to suppress, discover, and destroy Ukrainian artillery forces. And now I expect that due to some problems with artillery and Russian complete superiority, the Russians may try to make another attempt to storm Avdiivka and to cross the railways and to start offensive operation from this foothold further to the west and northwest in direction of the main strongholds that located to the southwest of Klishchiivka. When talking about Bogdanovka, Ivanovska, we got a very important update, a very interesting video. By the way, from the same area we got another Lancet strike, so this is probably the sixth geolocated Lancet strike just for the previous 24 hours. So this is real and very interesting tactics. But this is not the most important video from Bogdanovka direction. The most important is that the Russians starting a very heavy artillery preparation of Popovo forest. On this footage we can see how the Russians bombing this territory very accurately with a TOS flamethrower weapon system. There were lots of, let's say, missiles or shells launched in this area. They got the target, as you can see, and this is very powerful weapon once again, and very likely that nothing can survive after such a strike. And all these attacks, at least these attacks, reminds me, or at least tell me, that probably the Russians during the next few hours, or maybe the Russians have already launched at another reconnaissance and force attempt to enter the Popovo forest through the new cemetery. So we'll follow, but as I understand, we might have some updates during the upcoming night. Now we are moving to Avdiivka area, and we have a lot of also geolocations, and as you can see, most of these geolocations we received from Ukrainian side. Significant number of FPV drone strikes against the Russian positions in Krasnogorovka, in Vasilievka, Verkhnytorets, along the railways to the northern part. And what does it mean? Why the Ukrainians are so focused in this area? The thing is that the Russian sources are saying, and the Ukrainian sources confirm this information, that the Russians are about to penetrate the Ukrainian defense belt in the vicinity of Berdychi and to establish complete 100% control over the village and to answer Berdychi itself, to bypass Stepovo and to enter Berdychi itself. During the previous weeks and days, the Russians managed to completely secure their northern flank, which now the Ukrainians lost their possibilities to counterattack the Russians in Stepovo from the north because of the security of the flank. And the only way how the Ukrainians can counterattack the Russians is the area between chemical plant and Berdychi. And this territory, of course, is under complete Russian control. Yes, the Ukrainians have some results, they had some results, they will show some results in the future, but once again the Ukrainians are about to fall on this line, and this is the reason why the Ukrainians are so concentrated with FPV drone strikes along the main supply roads. Furthermore, we got another interesting updates. According to information we have, the Russians, as a result of offensive operation, managed to improve their positions further deep inside of Avdiivka central area, and they're getting along this residential area. So this is very important operation as well, and we see that the Russians more or less pretty successful, because we understand that the main purpose of the Russians, at least on this direction, is to improve their positions, something like this. And if they are able to do this, then the Russians will be able to cut supply and to split Avdiivka in two parts, let's say chemical plant and the southern part of Avdiivka. So if the Russians are able to, let's say, get deep inside of this area, and this is exactly what the Russians are doing right now. But for now, there is like a lot of operational goals, tactical goals, strategical goals when talking about certain, let's say, front line. For example, the movements from the Terikon to the south, it's like a tactical plan with the purpose to establish and to cut this area in two parts. There is like a strategical goal to penetrate Stepovo and to enter Berdychi, which will reduce and which will increase the difficulties for the Ukrainians on this front line. But for now, a lot of goals, and we can talk the same updates about the southern direction, the former aviation air defense base, Severna Tonik, and so on. But the current situation shows us that the Russians have a lot of problems with logistics. Once again, if we increase the number of updates since the 13th of January, we see the concentration of Ukrainian fire with FPV drones. Significant number, and every single icon means another destroyed or damaged Russian armored vehicle or artillery forces or infantry. So that means that the Russians have problems with logistics, and they need to solve this problem somehow. And you might ask, but how the Russians can solve this problem? And the solution is very simple. They can't solve this problem for 100%, but they can reduce the losses. And the only one possibility is how the Russians can reduce their losses while they're transferring and regrouping their forces from Donetsk to Krasnogorovka is to establish control over this road, N20. So this is the only solution that the Russians currently have, and probably right exactly today the Russians started the implementation of this operation. Because if the Russians can secure this N20 road, then they will be able to stretch their logistics, and then they will be able to have at least 2 or 3 roads for supply purposes. And then the Ukrainians will be forced to cover a bigger territory, bigger square kilometers for FPV drone strikes, which of course, due to the lack of FPV drones, will lead to reduce of the Russian losses. And for these purposes, the Russians launched artillery preparation. By the way, during the previous months, since the beginning of January, the Russians were bombing this area heavily. As you can see, they were attacking the Ukrainians along the road and the southern park. So they were pretty focused. And today we got another video. And on this footage, we can see the Russian FPV drone strikes attacking the Ukrainian trenches, fortifications exactly on the eastern part of Avdiivka, which confirms the Russian plans for this area. And once again, the most important goal is to restore control over N20 road, which will allow the Russians to stretch and to make their logistic more flexible when supporting and supplying their forces in the vicinity of Krasnogorovka, Stepovo, Berdychi, and so on. This is the vital question for the Russians, to tell the truth. This is not the most important, let's say, objective when talking about the entire battle of Avdiivka, because the Russians will not be able to, achieve significant results or to destroy a significant number of Ukrainian forces or something like this by capturing this territory. They will not achieve any benefits when talking about the combat of battle for Avdiivka. The only thing they will get is logistic, but at this stage of operation, this is the most important part. Now we are moving to Marinka, South Donetsk direction. We haven't received anything. By the way, before we continue with South Donetsk, we need to pay attention to the Ministry of Defense report, because we got very interesting numbers regarding the Avdiivka, regarding the Donetsk direction. Very interesting numbers. According to the Ministry of Defense of Russian Federation, as a result of clashes on Donetsk direction, the Ukrainians lost around 300 soldiers, around 44 vehicles, including 9 tanks, 4 armored vehicles, including 1 Bradley, and 27 just light vehicles, and many and lots of artillery systems. So this is a very heavy level of losses, not about the personnel, because yes, there was almost the same. The very heavy level of losses about armored vehicles and just regular vehicles. The last time we saw such numbers maybe was during the Ukrainian greatest counteroffensive somewhere in the vicinity of Robotyne or Vremivka tactical bridgehead. So something happened during the 14th, and once again, according to some sources, the Russians managed to suppress and to destroy and penetrate the Ukrainian defense belt in Stepovo, Berdychi, and the main losses are coming exactly from this area. So we'll see. When talking about South Donetsk direction, we have the same updates. As a result of clashes, the Russians are saying they managed to discover and to destroy and damage some bases and warehouses and headquarters of 72nd Mechanized Brigade, somewhere in the vicinity of the city by the name of Yelizavetovka. And as a result of those attacks, the Ukrainians, mainly the forces of 72nd Mechanized Brigade, lost around 170 soldiers, 9 armored vehicles, including 2 tanks. During the previous days, the Russians were bombing and attacking this territory heavily, trying to destroy the units and positions they managed to discover during the previous days of clashes on the outskirts of Novomikhailivka. The clashes are very heavy. We haven't received any updates about any further Russian progress to the northeast of Novomikhailivka in the vicinity of the strongholds or on the southern part of Novomikhailivka. Today we were getting just updates about the bombings, FPV drone strikes against the discovered Ukrainian positions. But once again, I don't think that the pulse is going to be too long. We need more updates, details about further Russian progress, and obviously the next days, very soon we're going to receive more updates about this. When talking about Robotyne, as we discussed, the Russians for the first time since they lost Robotyne due to Ukrainian counteroffensive operation managed to start bombing and attacking the village, inside of the village, with FPV drones. This is very important piece of news, probably the most important one. Once again, the Russians, due to the fact that Ukrainians were attacking, were forced to withdraw their positions step by step from Robotyne to Kopyazin, to Novoprokopovka, to Acheretovata, and many other different villages and cities and settlements in this direction. And as they were forced to step back, almost every single day we continue receiving the geolocations from this Babry squad, but always every single day they were more and more far from Robotyne for another 400 meters, 100 meters. If you remember, the Babry were publishing their strikes somewhere in Kopany, somewhere to the south, so west of Novoprokopovka, maybe sometimes a little bit to the east, and now we see the FPV drone strikes inside of the village. This strike, first of all, means that the second battle for Robotyne has officially started, and the second battle for Robotyne has started on the 14th of January of 2024 due to the geolocated video, and this is, as we discussed, the first stage of any offensive operation, the clearing with FPV drones. And obviously now we're gonna receive every single day, maybe every 2 days or 3 days, more and more videos about another series of attacks against the Ukrainian forces inside of the village. From the other side, we see that the Russians continue their offensive operation from Verbova to the fields that located to the west of the village, and today we got more geolocated videos of Russian storming operations inside this area, so the pressure continues and the situation for Ukrainians here is getting worse and worse. As we discussed, but once again, let's talk about this. The Russians continue formation of their new 48th Air Assault Brigade of the 58th Combined Arms Army. This is a very important piece of news because either the Russian sources noted this and the Western sources like Institute of Study of War, and the main purpose of this new formation is to use completely different approach when storming this or that positions. The Russians, let's say in like few words, the Russians will try to use helicopters to bypass the first defense belt to establish foothold, let's say 5, 6, 10 kilometers behind the first defense belt. While these forces will hold this territory, the main Russian forces will try to attack and penetrate the defense of Ukrainian forces, and these forces of let's say brigades will be covered and protected by FPV drone strikes, while the Ukrainians will try to counterattack. So basically the Russians are planning to do the same thing as Ukrainians do every single day in Krynky. The only difference is that when talking about Krynky, the Ukrainians have just one possibility to send support and supply using boats, and the Russians are going to do the same as Ukrainians do in Krynky, but with helicopters. It's completely different approaches, but when talking about supply and support, but the goal is the same: to get a foothold, to dig in deeper, as deep as possible. Also, we know that Ukrainians have a lot of problems. They don't have tall flamethrower systems. The Ukrainians don't have artillery forces. They have just cluster rounds, maybe HIMARS. So when talking about the holding of the foothold by professionals, it's not the kind of weapon that can force the Russians to withdraw their positions or that can damage them if they are able to dig in deeper. And this is the purpose of the Russians, and very interesting when exactly they're going to launch their first attack. because this might be a turning point, because if this attack can be if this attack show the results, then the Russians will improve and they will, let's say, stretch this experience along the entire combat line. And basically the defense belt that Ukrainians currently create will play no role, no game, no effect in the future, let's say, in the future stages of the special military operation. So this is very important update. We'll see whether the Russians are able to implement this or that operation. When talking about Krynky, once again, the Russians continue using their swarm drone tactics. Now, once again, with Lancet. So this is the second area where the Russians are using Lancet massively. The first updates we got from Bakhmut, Artyomovsk. The second updates we're getting from Tyaginka, Krynky area. A lot of artillery systems were destroyed. So this is it. This is the situation. The Ukrainians send their Marines to Krynky, and then they're using just two things: artillery and FPV drones. And every time the Russians want to counterattack, they start bombing territory with artillery, and then they're attacking accurately with drones those who manage to survive or to enter the village. Meanwhile, the Ukrainian Marines that are located in the basements even don't go on the surface. They're getting in the basements and they're sitting there waiting when another wave of attack will be finished. And the Russians are planning to do the same, but with helicopters instead of boats. Very interesting. So as you can see, the Russians destroyed significant number of artillery forces, and this is also another reason why the Russians understand that they have more chances, better chances to implement marine helicopter operation than Ukrainians, because the Russians have Lancet. They have superiority in drones, in missiles, and basically they can destroy everything that Ukrainians will bring to the combat line, let's say to destroy this or that foothold of airborne division forces or something like this. And that's it for today. Military Summary channel reminds to condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.